Hello and welcome to this TDD tutorial, and welcome to the final section of this course. Congratulations, you persisted until the very end. In previous section we talked about dependency injection, and in this one we will talk about some patterns that might come useful. To be more exact, in this section we are going to examine repository pattern and service layer pattern. So let's start from the first video of this section and take a closer look into repository pattern. In this video we will see definition, purpose and benefits of repository pattern. We will talk a bit about unit of work, and finally we will give a really short overview of entity framework. The definition of repository pattern that I like the most is from Martin Flower's book Patterns of Enterprise Application Architecture. In this book he defined repository pattern like this. It mediates between the domain and data mapping layers using a collection-like interface for accessing domain objects. This essentially means that repository is actually an in-memory collection of data that can be easily stored in the database. This also means that repository will have somewhat standard CRUD API. What I mean by somewhat standard CRUD API? Well, take a look at this repository implementation. It certainly misses an update function. This is because update on the in-memory collection of data is nothing more but getting the data and changing it. So we see that we have repository abstraction, iRepository, and we have implementation of that. You can also see that we made it generic. So, what are the benefits of using this pattern? Well, first, it minimizes query logic. That is because we are summing all the calls to our database in this class. Surely we need to take care and create repository for each entity in our system if we want to have a nice design. It also decouples application code from persistence layer. This means that we can replace repository with other specific implementation for some database, and we won't have to change our business logic. And of course, it makes our code more testable. We're able to mock repository object in our application code and test it in an easier manner. Let's say a few words about unit of work. As you were able to see in a repository pattern, we didn't have any save methods. That is because that is the purpose of unit of work. Basically, its main purpose is to save what is in object memory collection to the database. Here's how that looks like. Unit of work can contain one or more repositories, and it is able to save data in the database. You will see how this will work when we use Entity Framework in later videos. And since I mentioned that we are going to use Entity Framework in next few videos, let's just have a brief overview of it. This will be just a high-level run-through to get you familiar with the main concepts. So, official definition of Entity Framework goes like this. Entity Framework is object relational mapper that enables .NET developers to work with a database using .NET objects. It eliminates the need for most of the data access code that developers usually need to write. In essence, it maps code objects to the database tables and vice versa. Here is how our application usually looks like from the domain-driven development point of view. We are having three layers. First one is user interface or presentation layer, second one is business logic layer or domain layer, and finally we are having data access layer. Data access layer basically uses Entity Framework to communicate with the database in an easy manner. There are two approaches when it comes using Entity Framework. First one is called database first approach. In this approach we create database and then we use Entity Framework to create domain objects and then build code on top of that. Second one is code first approach. This is the approach that we will use in our examples later. In a nutshell, we will first write the code, including domain objects, and then Entity Framework will know to create tables from these objects. For this approach we need to be aware of two classes that we will heavily rely on. First one is DB contexts. We will have one class in our system that will inherit this DB context. This way Entity Framework will know what needs to be created. This class will also expose DB set properties for the types that you want to be the part of the model and to be created in the database.